100 million deaths. This is not a statistic from a global war or a forgotten medieval plague. This is the price the 20th century paid for a single consumer product, packaged in an elegant pack. The forecast for the 21st century is 1 billion, a figure that shatters the imagination, that refuses to settle in the mind, a 1 followed by 9 zeros. A billion lives cut short, each one someone's unique universe, full of love, hopes, and memories. A billion last, raspy breaths in hospital wards, flooded with the smell of bleach and despair. It is the only legal product on the planet that, when used strictly according to instructions, exactly as its creator intended, is guaranteed to kill half of its regular, loyal consumers. Stop for a moment and consider this blood-chilling, crystal-clear paradox. Not through misuse, not through accidental overdose or breaking the rules, but through the daily, methodical, ritualistic following of instructions forced upon you by the most sophisticated and ruthless marketing machine in human history. 20 times a day, 30, 40, you bring to your lips a perfectly engineered device for suicide on an installment plan. And all of this was their plan from the very beginning. They didn't sell you tobacco, never tobacco. They sold you an image, a meticulously constructed myth. The Marlboro Man, carved from granite and absolute freedom, silently gazing at the sunset prairies from the height of his moral superiority. They sold you rebellion packaged in 20 neat white cylinders. They sold you masculinity, independence, and the right to instant chemical calm. But behind the glossy cover, behind the manly squint and clouds of fragrant smoke, a completely different reality was hiding. Reality is an oncology ward at 3 in the morning, flooded with the deathly light of fluorescent lamps. It is a collapsed chest cavity, eaten away by metastases on a black and white X-ray, resembling a star map where every star is a focal point of inevitable death. It is the humiliating, raspy, gurgling breath through a plastic tube in the throat where there was once a living human voice capable of singing lullabies and speaking words of love. It is the acrid, pervasive smell of antiseptics and bleach desperately trying to overpower another sickeningly sweet smell of rot and bleak animal fear. This is the real, unvarnished price of that very coolness that was printed for decades in the pages of magazines and broadcast from movie screens, but this was only the tip of the iceberg. They told you it was freedom, the freedom of choice of an adult, independent person. But it was slavery. True chemical slavery, meticulously calibrated in sterile laboratories and wrapped in a beautifully designed cardboard pack. 20 shackles a day, 30, 40. Every smoke break is not a pause, it is a ritual of submission to your tiny paper master. They knew, oh believe me, they knew everything from the very beginning. Every case of lung cancer, every myocardial infarction at 45, every leg amputated due to gangrene and blocked arteries was not a tragic accident. They were a pre-calculated, acceptable business risk entered into the accounting books under the collateral costs column. You were never a customer to them. You were expendable material, a disposable, replaceable unit in the most profitable and most lethal business model ever devised by humanity. They built their empire on your broken lives, and the scale of their cynicism is still beyond comprehension. They saw in you not a person, but a lifetime revenue stream with a projected end date, and they were already preparing your replacement. They lied to your grandfather, who returned from the battlefields of World War II with a free cigarette in his mouth, issued as part of his soldiers' rations. They lied to your parents, showing television ads with smiling, respectable doctors recommending milder cigarettes for your throat. Now they lie to your children, disguising the same drug with the flavors of mango, strawberry ice cream, and mint. And this new high-tech lie has become even more sophisticated, even more insidious. The billions of dollars they paid in fines from lawsuits are not a punishment. It is not remorse or an admission of guilt. It was simply a licensing fee, a license to continue killing on a global planetary scale. The cost of doing business, nothing more. They simply entered these expenses into their next financial report. Their greatest, most terrible, and most enduring victory is not in money, not in market capitalization, and not in their influence over politicians. Their greatest victory is in your head. It lies in the fact that millions of people around the world still sincerely believe that it was their own, independent, free choice. But this illusion was their most perfect weapon. But to understand the scale of this planned madness, this global, century-long genocide, we must travel to the past, far back, to where it all began. Not on the rumbling factory conveyor belts and not in the oak-paneled boardrooms of corporations, but in the deafening silence of the prairies with a shamanic ritual and sacred smoke. Thousands of years ago, on the vast expanses of the American continent, tobacco was not a commodity. It was a spirit, a powerful and demanding deity. Its broad, fleshy, sun-drenched leaves, carefully dried and rolled, served not for a moment's pleasure, but for great deeds. For the Maya, it was the sacred sitar, an instrument for communicating with the gods of the underworld. Its smoke was a bridge between the world of humans and the world of spirits. Its fragrant, thick smoke, slowly rising to the heavens from a pipe or a sacrificial fire, carried with it prayers, requests for rain and harvest, and thanks for a successful hunt. It was an instrument of high diplomacy, sealing peace treaties between warring tribes with the peace pipe. It was a powerful medicine used by shamans with great caution and deep, reverent respect. They knew its power and its danger. They knew that the spirit of tobacco could both heal and kill. Everything changed on one fateful day in October 1492. Christopher Columbus, intoxicated by his own triumph, stepped onto land he mistakenly believed to be the outskirts of India. The indigenous Taino people, encountering the strange, bearded newcomers in gleaming armor, offered them their most valuable gifts: fresh fruit, pure water, and the dried leaves of an unknown plant. Columbus, not understanding their true, sacred significance, disdainfully threw the fragrant bundle overboard, but his sailors, more curious and less scrupulous, took with them both the leaves and the strange habit of drinking smoke. Thus, aboard the caravel Santa Maria, rocking on the waves, the sacred plant began its long journey to the old world, a journey that would become a curse for millions. In Europe, tobacco instantly became a sensation, an object of burning curiosity. First, it was an exotic curiosity for the botanical gardens of the aristocracy, then a fashionable fad of the bohemians, and soon a miracle cure for all ailments, the sacred herb. The French ambassador to Portugal, an ambitious and cunning diplomat named Jean-Nicot de Villemain, saw in the new plant a chance to rise at court. He sent tobacco seeds and a pinch of snuff to the Queen of France, Catherine de' Medici, touting it as a panacea for her severe migraines. The remedy, to the astonishment of the court physicians, actually worked. The Queen was delighted. In gratitude and in honor of the cunning diplomat, the main active alkaloid, a powerful neurotoxin contained in the leaves, would be named nicotine, an irony worthy of the pen of a brilliant playwright. The name of the man who gave tobacco its fame as a healer would forever become synonymous with its deadly poison. But at the time, no one yet suspected this. Tobacco was rapidly turning into a commodity, into gold. Vast plantations cultivated by the grueling labor of African slaves covered the fertile lands of the American colonies, bringing fabulous profits to European monarchs and trading companies. But even then, it was not yet a weapon of mass destruction. Pipe smoking, chewing tobacco, snuff, even expensive cigars, all of this required time, a certain ritual, and was not accessible to everyone. Hand-rolled cigarettes remained an expensive luxury for bohemians and the elite. To turn the habit into a global, all-consuming epidemic, an architect was needed, its own dark gospel of mass production, and that architect was already at the door. His name was James Buchanan Duke, but everyone just called him Buck. The son of a tobacco farmer from Civil War-ravaged North Carolina, he inherited from his father not a plantation, but an indomitable, predatory energy and a complete absence of moral scruples. He looked at the tobacco business of the late 19th century and saw in it only patriarchal inefficiency and missed opportunities. He saw that the main, most tantalizing piece of the pie, the mass market, the millions of ordinary workers in factories and on construction sites, was still unconquered. The main obstacle was production. The most skilled and fastest cigarette roller, a true virtuoso of his craft, could manually produce no more than 4 cigarettes a minute. This was painfully slow, incredibly expensive, and did not allow for the creation of a truly cheap product accessible to everyone. Buck Duke, with his animal instinct for profit, understood a fundamental truth. To enslave the world, you had to make addiction cheap and fast and cheap as a morning cup of coffee or an evening newspaper. In 1881, rumors reached him of a young, brilliant, and unknown inventor from Virginia named James Bonsack. This youth, almost a boy, had created a prototype for an automatic cigarette rolling machine. Other tobacco magnates, old and conservative, were afraid of this mechanical monster. They feared the machine would flood the market with cheap products and crash prices, destroying their cozy, elitist business. Duke, however, saw in this rumbling, imperfect contraption of cast iron and steel his personal holy grail. He immediately signed an exclusive, enslaving contract with Bonsack, staking the entire future of his small company. He bet on the machine. What happened next changed the course of history forever. Bonsack's machine, refined and improved by the best engineers Duke hired, transformed from a clumsy prototype into a true industrial leviathan. Instead of a measly 4 cigarettes a minute, it spat out 200 perfectly straight, identical cylinders of death. In a single 10-hour work day, one single machine produced 120,000 cigarettes, a volume that previously required the labor of an entire army of 40 highly skilled rollers. The cost of producing one pack plummeted to fractions of a cent. Duke could sell cigarettes 5-10 times cheaper than any of his competitors. But here he ran into a new, unexpected problem, born of his own phenomenal success. He was producing immeasurably more cigarettes than the entire American market of the time could consume. His warehouses were bursting with unsold goods. And so he made a second, no less brilliant, and just as diabolical, decision. If there was no demand in the market, it had to be created artificially, aggressively, at any cost. Duke became a pioneer of modern advertising, pouring unprecedented sums for the time into it, 20% of his entire revenue. He placed advertisements in every magazine, on every newspaper page. He sponsored horse races, boxing matches, and beauty pageants. He was the first to come up with the idea of inserting collectible cards into cigarette packs with images of famous actresses, baseball players, and exotic Indian chiefs, turning the purchase of cigarettes into a game of chance, a treasure hunt. He didn't just create a product, he created a brand, a culture, an addiction. He was the first to understand that you don't sell a commodity, you sell a dream. By 1890, his company, the American Tobacco Company, like a predatory octopus, controlled 40% of the American cigarette market. By the beginning of the 20th century, having ruthlessly absorbed or bankrupted all his main competitors, he had become an absolute monopolist, the tobacco king of America. Buck Duke did not invent tobacco. He did not even invent the cigarette. He invented the industry of addiction. He took the sacred plant of shamans and turned it into a standardized, perfectly calibrated system for delivering nicotine directly to the brain's limbic system. He didn't just create a product, he created a perfect, merciless, and self-perpetuating machine for extracting profit from human weakness. But even he, in his wildest and most avaricious dreams, could not have imagined what an apocalyptic monster his creation would become. The empire built by Buck Duke became a solid foundation for something much larger, much more faceless, and therefore even more terrifying. Corporations took the stage: Philip Morris, R.J. Reynolds, Brown & Williamson, Lorillard. Giant, anonymous structures that inherited from Duke his main and only commandment: profit above human life. They turned marketing into black magic and public relations into a tool of total, all-encompassing lies. And their first major battlefield, their first great victory, was women. At the beginning of the 20th century, smoking for a woman from respectable society was an absolute taboo. It was considered vulgar, indecent, the domain of actresses of dubious reputation, women of easy virtue, and radical suffragettes. The tobacco companies, with their eternal thirst for growth, saw in this a colossal missed opportunity. Exactly half of the potential market was completely closed to them. Then George Washington Hill, the new ambitious president of American Tobacco, turned to a man who could sell anything to anyone. His name was Edward Bernays. He was the nephew of Sigmund Freud himself and is rightly considered the founding father of modern public relations, the science of managing the subconscious of the masses. Bernays, having absorbed his famous uncle's ideas about hidden, irrational desires, understood that it was not cigarettes he needed to sell. He needed to sell an idea, a symbol. On the advice of a psychoanalyst he hired, he linked the act of smoking with women's subconscious desire to challenge male power and phallic symbolism. The cigarette, in his brilliant concept, became not just a tobacco product, but a symbol of emancipation, a sign of equality, a challenge to the patriarchal world. He devised a poetic and powerful name for it: torches of freedom. But how to make the world accept this idea? A spectacle was needed that would shake the foundations of society. During the lavish 1929 Easter parade on Fifth Avenue in New York, he organized a meticulously orchestrated spectacle. A group of young, beautiful, and fashionable socialites, hired in advance by Bernays, at his secret signal demonstratively took out Lucky Strike cigarettes hidden under their clothes and lit up in front of the astonished crowd. The press, alerted in advance and warmed up by Bernays's press releases, erupted with enthusiastic headlines about the torches of freedom. Smoking overnight became a fashionable, bold, almost feminist gesture. Cigarette sales among women skyrocketed. Having conquered women, the industry targeted the most reliable and unshakable bastion of public trust: doctors. In the 1930s and 40s, one of the most cynical and immoral advertising campaigns in human history unfolded. Glossy magazines and newspapers were filled with images of respectable grey-haired doctors in snow-white coats, who with a kind, fatherly smile recommended one brand of cigarettes or another. "More doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette," read the famous slogan, creating the completely false impression that the medical community had made its professional choice. For your throat, they don't aggravate a cough. Enjoy without worry, other advertisements claimed, often placed directly in medical journals. They didn't just lie. They created a total, impenetrable illusion that smoking was not only harmless, but was somehow approved by those whose duty it is to protect our health. They turned the symbol of healing into a symbol of deception. But their greatest success was yet to come. And then World War II broke out, and the tobacco giants, with their unerring nose for tragedy and profit, saw a gold mine in it. They made an unspoken but solid deal with the US government. Cigarettes, along with chocolate, canned meat, and ammunition, were officially included in the daily soldier's ration. They were handed out by the millions completely free of charge on all fronts, from the sun-scorched beaches of the Pacific to the frozen forests of the Ardennes. The corporations presented this as their patriotic duty, as support for the nation's morale. In reality, it was the largest and most cynical investment in future customers in history. Millions of young, healthy men facing death daily, finding in a cigarette their only solace and a way to relieve inhuman stress, got hooked on nicotine. Returning home as heroes, they brought this habit with them, becoming lifelong, loyal consumers and passing it on to their children. They thought they had defeated the enemy, but they didn't know that the main enemy had returned with them, hidden in their own lungs. They had conquered women, doctors, and an entire generation of soldiers, the greatest generation. The whole world was at their feet, shrouded in the bluish haze of Lucky Strike, Camel, and Chesterfield cigarettes. They had penetrated Hollywood, hospital wards, every home and every office. Their triumph seemed absolute, their power eternal. But behind the scenes of this grandiose celebration of life, in the silence of scientific laboratories and pathologists' offices, a quiet, sinister whisper was already being heard, growing louder with each passing year. It was a short, terrible word: cancer. By the early 1950s, isolated alarm bells had merged into a deafening toll. Doctors all over the world, from London to Tokyo, from New York to Buenos Aires, began to notice a frightening, irrefutable correlation. The explosive growth in cigarette sales after the war was followed by an equally explosive growth in the incidence of lung cancer, previously considered an extremely rare, almost casuistic disease. Respected scientific journals, such as the British Medical Journal and the Journal of the American Medical Association, published one groundbreaking study after another, statistically proving a direct, deadly link. The public, previously lulled by advertisements about smoothness for the throat, began to suspect something. For the first time in history, cigarette sales began to decline. For the tobacco giants, the moment of truth had arrived. They had two paths: admit the horrifying truth and begin to gradually wind down their deadly business, or commit the greatest, most massive fraud in the history of the corporate world. They chose the second. On December 15, 1953, in the luxurious Plaza Hotel in New York, a secret meeting took place that changed the world. At one table, in clouds of expensive cigar smoke, the heads of all the largest U.S. tobacco companies gathered: Philip Morris, R.J. Reynolds, American Tobacco, Cohen Inc., Lorillard, and others. These were sworn enemies, waging a merciless war for every percentage point of market share. But in the face of a common existential threat, they united into a criminal cartel. The conductor of this meeting was the powerful public relations firm Hill & Knowlton, masters of laundering the dirtiest reputations. Their strategy was simple and brilliant in its diabolical villainy. They proposed not to deny the science head-on. That would be foolish and counterproductive. They proposed to create doubt. Their plan, dubbed a white paper, was a manifesto of war against the truth, to fund their own supposedly independent research that would cast doubt on the findings of mainstream science, to constantly repeat through the press and paid-for experts that the scientific data is contradictory, that the link has not been conclusively proven, and that further, more in-depth research is required, to create an endless scientific debate to drown the inconvenient truth. The decision they made in that smoke-filled room determined the fate of hundreds of millions of people for decades to come. Thus, the Tobacco Institute was born, a respectable front organization supposedly created for the objective study of health issues related to smoking. In reality, it was a multi-billion-dollar propaganda machine. Its sole task was to produce and disseminate disinformation on an industrial scale. They hired and generously funded independent scientists who obediently published articles stating that lung cancer could be caused by air pollution, genetic predisposition, asbestos, anything but cigarettes. They created a dense, impenetrable smokescreen of lies that successfully hid the truth from the public for another 40 years. But the most terrifying and cynical things were not happening in the public sphere. They were happening in their own top-secret laboratories. Internal documents of the tobacco companies, made public decades later thanks to lawsuits and leaks from brave insiders, paint a blood-chilling picture of total, conscious deception. As early as the mid-1950s, their own scientists working in secret research centers in Richmond and Winston-Salem had reached absolutely irrefutable conclusions. They conducted large-scale experiments on mice and rats, daily, methodically painting their skin with concentrated cigarette tar. The test animals developed malignant tumors with terrifying 100% regularity. Photographs of these unfortunate creatures with huge, ugly growths on their skin were filed away in folders stamped confidential. They scrupulously analyzed the chemical composition of the smoke and identified dozens of potent carcinogens in it: benzopyrene, polonium-210, a radioactive element, nitrosamines. Moreover, they thoroughly studied the nature of nicotine addiction. Their scientists understood that nicotine is a powerful psychoactive drug that acts on the same acetylcholine receptors in the brain as cocaine or heroin. All of this was documented in detail in thousands of internal reports, stamped secret and for internal use only. In one famous memo, a lawyer for Brown and Williamson wrote as early as 1963, "We are in the business of selling nicotine, an addictive drug." They knew, and they consciously, cold-bloodedly, lied to the whole world every day. They thought they had locked the truth in their safes, but they failed to account for one thing: the human factor. While their PR agents at press conferences told the world about conflicting scientific data and the need for an unbiased approach, their engineers and chemists in the laboratories were working on a completely different, sinister task: how to make the cigarette even more addictive, even more irresistible. In the 1960s, they made a revolutionary discovery that changed their product forever. They discovered that adding ammonia to the tobacco blend changes the chemical balance of the smoke, converting nicotine into its so-called freebase form, freebase nicotine. This type of nicotine is absorbed into the bloodstream through the lungs much faster and more efficiently, and reaches the brain almost instantly, in 7–10 seconds, causing a more powerful, sharper, and more pleasant hit. This technology, essentially analogous to the one used to make crack from cocaine, made Marlboro's cigarettes, produced using this process, the global sales leader. It made cigarettes even more enslaving, especially for teenagers and new smokers whose brains are still developing. They weren't just selling poison, they purposefully modified it to enslave even faster and more reliably, turning a first-time buyer into a lifelong customer. When public pressure and the fear of cancer became too strong to ignore, the industry pulled off another brilliant and monstrously cynical scam: light cigarettes. They began to mass-market cigarettes with reduced tar and nicotine as a safer, smarter alternative for the health-conscious consumer. Reassuring words appeared on the packs: light, mild, low tar. Millions of smokers concerned about their health but unable to overcome their addiction switched to these new products with relief, sincerely believing they were reducing the risks to their lives. But this was perhaps the cruelest and most large-scale deception in the industry's history. They made a fatal mistake, believing that the monster had suddenly decided to become kinder. The whole secret of light cigarettes lay in tiny ventilation holes, almost invisible to the naked eye, which were drilled by a laser at the base of the filter. When such a cigarette was tested by a special smoking machine, programmed for standard, even puffs, these holes actively drew in ambient air, diluting the smoke. As a result, the machine's sensors showed excellent low numbers for tar and nicotine content, which the companies proudly printed in advertisements and reports for the government. But a living person smokes completely differently from a soulless machine. A body addicted to nicotine demands its dose, its saturation level. Smokers, not receiving their usual satisfaction, instinctively began to smoke light cigarettes differently. They unconsciously blocked the ventilation holes with their fingers and lips, taking more frequent and deeper puffs. As a result, they inhaled a much larger volume of smoke to compensate for its diluted nature, and often received an even larger dose of carcinogens than from regular cigarettes. Moreover, due to the need to take deep drags, the smoke penetrated the most distant peripheral parts of the lungs, causing a new, even more aggressive and difficult to diagnose type of cancer: adenocarcinoma. This was deception squared, deceiving the consumer and deceiving the regulatory bodies. The industry created a perfect illusion of safety that kept millions of people hooked and continued to kill them, but now, with their silent, deceived consent. But even this cynical deception was merely a rehearsal for their main, most monstrous performance. For decades, this colossal empire of lies seemed absolutely indestructible. Tobacco companies, possessing bottomless financial resources, won practically all the lawsuits filed against them by dying smokers or their grieving families. Their army of the country's best lawyers successfully argued in court that smokers had voluntarily assumed the risk and made a free choice. Their lobbyists were the most influential in Washington, blocking any attempts to tighten legislation. Any scientist who dared to openly speak out against them was subjected to methodical harassment, discrediting, and ostracism in the scientific community, which was generously sponsored by tobacco money. But in the early 1990s, the first deep cracks appeared in the monolithic armor. Insiders, former employees, and scientists tormented by their conscience began to secretly remove secret documents from corporate archives. Tens and then hundreds of thousands of pages, irrefutably proving decades of total deception. Public outrage reached a boiling point, and then the US Congress, sensing the winds of change, decided to make a public example of them. April 14, 1994, this day went down in the annals of corporate history as a symbol of absolute, unadulterated cynicism. In the hearing room of the US Congress's Subcommittee on Health and the Environment, under the dazzling glare of spotlights and the focus of dozens of television cameras, there they sat, the 7 heads of America's largest tobacco companies. 7 men in impeccably tailored, expensive suits, personifying an industry with an annual turnover of $50 billion. The press immediately dubbed them the 7 Dwarfs. They carried themselves confidently with a slight air of arrogance. They had come to recite for the 100,000th time their memorized mantra of free choice and conflicting data. Oregon Congressman Ron Wyden, methodically, without raising his voice, looking each of them straight in the eye, asked the same simple killer question. First to William Campbell, CEO of Philip Morris, then to James Johnston, head of R.J. Reynolds, one after another, without giving them a chance to recover. The question was, do you believe that nicotine is addictive? And one by one, after raising their right hands and swearing before God and country to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, they answered, I believe nicotine is not addictive. 7 times, 7 identical, cold, emotionless answers, clearly rehearsed with lawyers. At that very moment, as millions of Americans watched live, their lie, so brazen, so total, and so public, ceased to be just a lie. It became a historical fact, a monument to human greed, not made with hands. But they did not yet know that this moment of their seeming triumph would be the beginning of their end. What had already been found in the secret archives of their own companies turned their oath into a farce and was setting the stage for a devastating blow. This arrogant performance before Congress, full of contempt for common sense, became a classic Pyrrhic victory for the tobacco giants. The public denial under oath of the obvious fact of addiction sparked a wave of unprecedented fury and gave a powerful impetus to a new type of lawsuit. Now, lawsuits were filed not by individuals weakened by illness, but by entire states, demanding that the industry reimburse billions of dollars spent from healthcare budgets on treating smoking-related diseases. It was at this tense moment that the main heroes of this long-running drama took the stage. The insiders, people who had worked inside the system and at some point decided to destroy it from within. Jeffrey Wiggin, a former vice president of research and development at Brown & Williamson, became the most famous and most important of them. Risking his career, a multi-million-dollar pension, his reputation, and even his family's life, he made the decision to hand over thousands of pages of the company's most secret documents to the journalists of the program 60 Minutes and to prosecutors. These documents, later known as the Tobacco Papers, were not just evidence. They were the smoking gun in the killer's hand. They contained everything. Detailed research reports from the 1960s proving the carcinogenicity of cigarette tar. Cynical marketing plans to attract teenagers, whom they referred to in their internal jargon as replacement smokers, those who were to take the place of dying adult customers. Detailed legal strategies for concealing and destroying compromising scientific data. A 1981 Philip Morris memorandum stated in black and white, "The cigarette is not a product, it is a package. The product is nicotine. The package is simply a storage container for a day's supply of nicotine." So they weren't selling pleasure or a lifestyle, they were selling a dose. Armed with this irrefutable evidence, the state attorneys general went on a massive offensive. Courtrooms across the country turned into a veritable battlefield. The tobacco company's lawyers, accustomed to easy victories over lone plaintiffs, now faced a wall of their own secret reports. They saw their own internal memos on the courtroom screens, heard testimony from their own former scientists who, with tears in their eyes, described how they were forced to falsify data. The wall of lies they had so carefully built and reinforced over half a century was crumbling before their eyes, burying them under its rubble. The smell in the courtroom was no longer of tobacco. It was the smell of panic, the smell of a cornered, mortally wounded beast that understands the game is over. In November 1998, the historic Master Settlement Agreement was reached. The four largest U.S. tobacco companies agreed to pay 46 states more than $206 billion over the next 25 years, the largest civil settlement in history. They pledged to permanently cease many forms of advertising, including billboards, transit ads, sponsorship of sporting events, and the use of cartoon characters. Their main deceptive mouthpiece, the Tobacco Institute, was disbanded. It seemed to be a final and unconditional victory for the forces of good and public health. Newspapers around the world trumpeted the end of the tobacco era, but this was a dangerous, lulling illusion. The monster had not been killed, it was only wounded, and like any smart predator, it lay low and began to shed its skin. Having suffered a crushing defeat in the US domestic market and facing stricter laws in Western Europe, Big Tobacco pulled off its most cunning and global trick. They didn't waste resources on a hopeless fight against windmills in the West. They simply moved the battlefield. They unleashed the full force of their huge, newly freed marketing budgets and their decades-honed techniques of psychological manipulation on developing markets, Asia, Africa, Eastern Europe, and Latin America, to places where anti-tobacco legislation was weak or non-existent, where the population was less informed about the dangers and governments were more compliant and corrupt. They began to repeat the exact same century-old scenario played out by Buck Duke, but now on a planetary scale. In the cities of Indonesia, Russia, Nigeria, and Brazil, giant, glamorous billboards with images of success and freedom reappeared. At music festivals in Bangkok and Manila, beautiful young women in branded clothing reappeared, handing out free cigarettes to young people. Local sports teams once again began to wear Marlboro and Winston logos on their jerseys. They were selling the same myth of coolness, status, and belonging to the Western world that had worked so well in America in the mid-20th century. In countries where millions of people were just beginning to escape poverty, a pack of cigarettes from a famous Western brand became the cheapest and most accessible symbol of success. The result was predictable and tragic. Smoking rates in these regions skyrocketed, and with them, the future, delayed by 20-30 years, statistics of deaths from cancer, heart attacks, and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. They didn't stop the epidemic, they exported it. The harvest of death continued, but now on new, even more vast and fertile fields. But the most ingenious and insidious move of the evolved monster was yet to come. Realizing that the traditional cigarette, a product of combustion, had been demonized in the West for good, the industry made a paradoxical decision: to lead a revolution against itself. They began to speak the language of their sworn enemies, co-opting their terminology. Harm reduction, a safer alternative, a smoke-free future. And under these specious slogans, they launched a completely new generation of nicotine delivery products, developed in the very same secret laboratories where they had once devised adding ammonia to tobacco. The era of vaping and heated tobacco systems had arrived. The first harbinger was the company Juul, created by two ambitious Stanford graduates. Their product was ingenious in its design. It didn't look like a shameful, ashtray-smelling cigarette, but like a stylish gadget, a flash drive, or an expensive Apple accessory. It was high-tech, charged via USB, and offered the consumer not stinky tobacco smoke, but pleasant, sweet flavors of mango, mint, cucumber, and creme brulee. Their marketing campaign, built on social media and young influencers, was aimed directly at young people, at school children. Ostensibly, they claimed their goal was to help adult smokers quit, but in reality, they were creating a whole new generation of nicotine addicts. The secret was in the chemistry. The nicotine in Juul pods was in the form of nicotine salts, which allowed for the delivery of huge, high-impact doses into the body without causing the unpleasant scratchiness and throat irritation characteristic of cigarettes. Teenagers who had never smoked before got hooked on Juul en masse without even realizing that one small pod contains as much nicotine as an entire pack of cigarettes. It was a perfect trap, disguised as a trendy toy. The teen vaping epidemic in the US reached such proportions that the country's Surgeon General called it a national threat. Meanwhile, old tobacco giants like Philip Morris were not wasting any time. They launched their own innovative devices, the most famous of which became IQS, a heat-not-burn tobacco system. Their advertising rhetoric was flawless and calculated down to the last word, and 25% fewer harmful substances compared to regular cigarettes. They opened luxurious boutiques around the world, looking more like Apple stores or high-end jewelry salons, where polite consultants in white shirts told visitors about science, technology, and responsible choice. Once again, just as they had 70 years ago with doctor advertisements, they tried to create an illusion of safety, scientific validity, and even medical approval. They offered smokers not to quit their addiction, but to simply switch from one of their profitable products to another, even more profitable one. Today, we live in this brave new world that the tobacco industry has engineered for us. In a world where a deadly addiction is sold under the guise of a trendy gadget, where a powerful neurotoxin is masked by a harmless fruit flavor, where a century-old proven lie is packaged in a stylish, minimalist design. They have changed the packaging, but the essence of the product remains unchanged. The fundamental product is still nicotine, one of the most potent and fast-acting drugs known to mankind. And the business model has remained the same, to create a chemical dependency and then service it for life, extracting profit. They insistently claim that their new products are safer. Perhaps this is so, but the key word here is safer, not safe. Jumping from the 10th floor is also safer than from the 20th, but the final outcome in both cases is predictable. We still have no idea about the long-term, decades-delayed consequences of daily inhaling. An aerosol of propylene glycol, vegetable glycerin, and dozens of chemical flavorings into the lungs. The first alarming studies are already emerging, speaking of irreversible lung tissue damage, popcorn lung, an increased risk of cardiovascular diseases, and a weakened immune system. We, as humanity, are right now conducting a global, uncontrolled experiment on ourselves, and it is sponsored by the very same industry that lied to our faces for 100 years. The history of tobacco is not just the story of a product or an industry. It is a dark mirror in which human nature itself is reflected. It is a story of how the boundless greed of a handful of people can lead to the untold suffering of billions. About how easily our most intimate desires can be manipulated, the desire for freedom, for success, for social acceptance, and about how excruciatingly difficult it can be to admit that you have become the victim of a grand deception, especially when that deception has become a part of your identity, your daily ritual. They no longer hang ads with rugged cowboys on the streets. They hire cheerful TikTokers and popular bloggers. They no longer publish magazine ads with smiling doctors. They fund independent science blogs and vape reviewers who enthusiastically talk about the advantages of new devices. They no longer hand out free cigarettes to soldiers in the trenches. They make disposable vapes with cotton candy flavor and sell them near schools. The monster has not just survived, it has evolved, it has become smarter, more cunning. It has learned to mimic its environment. It still sits imperturbably in boardrooms in its expensive suits and looks at profit growth charts. And on those charts are you, your friends, your children, your future, because their real product is not tobacco and not vape. Their product is addiction. And the harvest continues.